I'm Cullen Bunn, and this is the Cullenoscopy. I was always a comic book kid, but I wasn't always a horror comic kid. I was more into superheroes when I was much younger. But at some point, I started getting into horror anthology books, House of Mystery, House of Secrets, the Charlton line, like a Bear and Werewolf's Haunted Library. And there's one story in particular that I always think about. I may have made it up because there was a comic story about a boy who lived on a farm, and his grandfather or uncle, maybe his dad, had a pipe, and he'd smoke this pipe, and sometimes he'd fall asleep smoking this pipe. And when he fell asleep, the smoke would roil out and turn into this monster, and it would chase this boy all over the farm. And I'm not sure any comic book has ever terrified me as much as that did when I was a kid, to the degree that I never smoked because of that comic book probably scaring me so badly. Now, the mystery of that comic is I have no idea what book it was. I've never been able to find it since I was a child. So if you're watching this and you happen to know what that comic is, reach out and let me know, because I would love to find it again, and I just haven't. So today we're going to be talking about horror in comics. And my guest host for this episode is Rebekah McKendry. Rebekah is a writer, a filmmaker, a film journalist, and an expert, all-around expert on horror. She recently did a comic book called Barstow that came out from Dark Horse, which is really great. So I'm really looking forward to chatting a little bit about horror comics with her. Okay, so we're talking horror comics. So the first question, the thing I got to know is, I know you're a horror kid from way back. Were you a comics kid?
I was, but not until I got to around high school, probably, because I was a kid of the 90s. And when I was in high school in the 90s, it's when Hellraiser was doing that mashup with Boom. And so all these amazing Hellraiser comics were pouring out, like right when I was in the middle of my high school career. And that's where I really bridged over, because there was also the Nightbreed comics that were coming out. And those Hellraiser comics were like next level for me because they were anthological. Whereas the movies, it was always like, we have to stay with Pinhead. If Pinhead's not in it, we don't have a Hellraiser. The comics were like, fuck that. And they would just pick up and drop it in trench warfare. And then they would pick it up again and like, no, okay, now we're in a city, like in an apartment building in New York. And it was just so cool to see how the lament configuration could transform into all of these different areas. And there were so many of those, and I loved every single one of them. And so that was like my biggest gateway from just straight horror movies into comics.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got my Pinhead right over here somewhere.
Yeah.
So it was funny. It's funny you bring up Pinhead, because I was just this morning, I was thinking about Hellraiser and thinking about cosmic horror. And I was like, is Hellraiser a cosmic horror story?
100%.
I think it is, right?
100%. Because we're dealing with otherworldly beasts and forbidden knowledge. And so it's got all the trappings there of, if Lovecraft wrote it as like a weird steampunk puzzle box, it would feel more like that. But no, it's anytime there's like forbidden knowledge and crosses into other realms and some other worldly beings, yeah, you're straight up cosmic.
Yeah. I feel like some people put it in the infernal horror realm, but I'm like, no, it goes beyond that.
And that was, Barker made the choice to call them angels and demons, but he never really did that. He just said angels to some, demons to other, which is supposed to mean like one man's pleasure is another man's pain. But that ended up taking on this kind of different meanings, because then they became denizens of hell. And then it's suddenly like a heaven versus hell, and Leviathan is overseeing hell and they're collecting souls. And so it ended up shifting from just what I think Barker originally intended, which was like his original title was like S&M travelers from other worlds or something like that. I'll have to look it up. But it was something applying that like they were from another dimension, but then it took on these bizarre religious connotations as it progressed. And so most people still think of it as angels and demons and kind of, Pinhead lives in hell, but it was never really intended that way.
Yeah, I agree. So horror comics were really that was your intro into comics then.
Mhm.
You were
Yeah.
horror from the get-go. Okay.
Oh, I was a total horror kid. Like it was just, and my parents, mom is very well. I used kind of call her an ex hippie, but no, she's like still full hippie. And it was very much like be free, follow your own vibe. And so when I was really into horror movies, my mom was just like, yeah, if that's your thing. So the rule in my house growing up was that as long as I had straight A's, I could watch whatever I wanted. Within like they didn't let me watch porn, of course. And my mom was weird on I'll call it nuclear holocaust movies because those were like a thing in the late 1980s, early 90s. And my mom was kind of like, these are a bit bleak. We're not going to watch Threads or The Day After Tomorrow. But if I was like, I want to watch Hills Have Eyes and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they were like, it's your vibe, do your thing. So I watched everything I could. And then it turned into reading because my mom was like a huge sci-fi buff, going slowly through all of her sci-fi books and then working my way over to King. And then that's what led me to Barker and, Robert McCammon and some of those other like greatest hit writers from that time period.
It's funny. I mean, we're getting off comics, but I will say just yesterday, I had a long conversation with someone about scary TV movies.
Oh my God.
And of course, we brought up Salem's Lot, which I still think holds up amazingly.
Oh,
and
yeah.
we brought up Trilogy of Terror and Day After Tomorrow or whatever it is. I remember watching that, and we had a assembly the next day after that movie to talk about how horrifying that movie was and how
Wow.
it was awful. But
I rarely remember my parents like shielding me from anything, but I remember them being like, we're going to tape this on the VHS and it's programmed and we're going to watch it later, not with you. And it was like,
smart.
okay.
That was smart.
Yeah.
That was smart.
I didn't see it till I was in college. And then I was like, Steve Gutenberg's hair fell out. I missed it. So, yeah.
The most horrible thing that could happen. Poor Steve Gutenberg. Yeah. For comics, for me, I was a superhero kid to begin with.
Mhm.
And I've always been into comics since I was real little. But I remember vividly, like my dad would go creek fishing, like cane pole, sitting in, put the cane pole in the mud and fishing in the creek. And whenever he would do that, I would gather a collection of horror comics. It was always horror comics. It's the only thing I would take to sit on the muddy creek bank and read while he was fishing. So that's when I got in. I mean, and it was all the anthology stuff, House of Mystery and books like that were the ones that really were my intro. Those Hellraiser comics in every iteration and the Nightbreed comics were amazing. I loved them so much.
Yeah. Oh my. And that was my first entrance into writing comics was after I had gushed about how much those comics meant to me. At some point, somebody from Clive Barker's camp had listened to me talk about it. I think I was at a convention here in LA, and they approached me and asked if I wanted to write the next Hellraiser comics with Seraphim, his company. And so that was the first comic I ever wrote. Were those we did 2 of them of the Hellraiser comics that were coming out through Seraphim.
And you know what? That's something that a lot of aspiring creators don't get is talk about the things you love. Talk about the things that get you excited because people see that stuff. I mean, and they reach out to you.
I always call it putting it out into the universe. So like if there's a movie that I 100% want to reboot, I will just start posting about it. And then, later on I'll find out that Universal doesn't want to do it and has no interest in it, but I will at least reach that conclusion because I put it out into the universe. So yeah, it's very much just like, talking about the things that you love and proselytizing them, I feel like has an effect.
I've been trying it with the movie Shakma for so long. And
oh my God, the baboon movie. Oh my gosh.
I'm telling you, I've been trying it for so long and it hasn't taken hold yet. But
my podcast partner, Elric, is a huge Shakma fan. So
I know you do trivia in LA and I'm far from you. My trivia team is called Shakma 2000. which is
Oh, hell yes. The one that I keep trying to do is Dr. Giggles. And I have taken this to Universal so many times and been like, y'all, Dr. Giggles, let's bring it back. And every single time they're like, wait, what do you want to reboot? And I even went, because I've been working with Dark Horse, I even went to them and I was like, let's talk about rebooting Dr. Giggles. And then they were kind of had the same response. So one day, y'all, Dr. Giggles, I have ideas. I want to do it.
I like that you go to Dark Horse and you're working on these comics and you're just like, Dr. Giggles, let's talk.
This is it. This is it. And again, it's putting it out into the universe, and they might not return my emails, or they might be like, you crazy, and that's fine, but I'm at least going to throw it out there, because otherwise I'm going to carry it around and it's going to like seethe inside of me of, why am I not talking about Dr. Giggles?
All right. So speaking of writing, you write film, you write prose, you write comics. What do you think comics does differently or gets right when it comes to horror?
So I will start by saying, just writing process alone, I had a severe learning curve going from films to comics. And it wasn't as bad when I was doing the Hellraiser one, because I was already like really familiar with the Hellraiser comics and I felt like I was kind of had a map to go on. But the very first comic that I did, where it was like mine and my husband, because we usually co-write, original IP, is one that's coming out from Simon & Schuster. It's a YA horror book called Pretty Evil. And Tim Seeley is our artist, and he is absolutely awesome. We wrote it, and it had been, Pretty Evil had started as a TV pilot. We'd actually had it optioned. It sat at a company for like 5 years, and the option came back to us. And I was like, if it got optioned the first time, we might be able to do something with it. So we repurposed it as a graphic novel and sent it out, and Simon & Schuster picked it up, and which has been an awesome experience. But writing that, after writing the screenplay, there was such a, like, I wrote it like storyboards, and I had problems not thinking in terms of, in film, what we call coverage, of like, I can't have a character just leave a room. I have to show them walking through the door. They have to flip the light switch off. Like, I just felt like I had to show the mechanics of how they moved around the space. And then even just the idea of dialogue versus how many panels are on the page versus how much we're seeing. I would have these like 9 panels of crowd scenes with a character giving a monologue in every single one. And then Tim would email me and be like, what the hell are you doing, McKendry's? And so there was such a learning curve for the first couple of swings at that one, of us figuring out how even just the world in comics flows differently from the world in film.
I don't think people get how different they really are. When you, I mean,
Gotcha.
it's very different. And to to your point, I used to, as a joke, I would send to like Brian Hurt, who I've done many comics with. I would send him pages that would say, there are 100 henchmen on this page. Bill doesn't like Joe, so they don't stand next to each other. Harry is not friends with Clinton, and they are across the room, and they cannot make eye contact. And I would just write these pages and pages just as a joke to torment him.
Oh my God. No, now I see like what a feat that is. Like crowd scenes, or, having 15,000 different characters, or the fact that I tend to like monologues and things like that, where Tim was just like, no, 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 no. Or even just the importance of the page turn, which brings me back to your question of like, how is horror different from writing it in a film sense to writing it in a comic sense? And what I've quickly discovered is that beauty of the page turn, that I am thinking about what it feels like, about that is your jump scare. That is when you get that pause, that you can slow the world down. You can punch in, you can really kind of slow it down, of like seeing a hand gradually getting close to a doorknob. But that open needs to come right before a page turn. And then the page turn is whatever's on the other side of the closet door. And that becomes your jump scare.
I could not possibly agree more. And there are some very successful horror comic writers who will tell you, you don't need that page turn, you don't need to do it. But I feel like it's a necessity. So
I love it.
I do too. It's a key for me. And God bless the people who can actually do it without the page turn, but I need it.
No, it is the bridge that took me from jump scares to the suspense that you're building to how it would function in comics. But my biggest kind of like, oh my God, the world is open, has just been on the sheer budget level. Because I've been in film for a decade or so. And in film, especially when you're an indie horror, every conversation begins and ends with, well, we can't afford it. And so, like Barstow, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec,
Well,
that one had started as a pilot as well that we had sold to a TV show, TV network, and then it'd come back to us. And even as we were having these conversations about the pilot with the TV network, it was like, well, I want the entire wall to disappear and just be like demon body. Really Lovecraftian demon body. And they're like, that's really expensive. And that was like every conversation I had. And then even thinking about it, well, what if we took it and turned it into a film? Well, we're looking at over 50 million, and horror is not happening in that range unless it's like a big giant franchise reboot. And so then suddenly writing it as a comic, sending it over to Tyler Jenkins, and his response was just, cool, demon wall. And that's it. And it's suddenly like, okay, I can fly, I can levitate people. It's just like a whole world.
Yeah, that's I always feel like in addition to the budget, you can it's sort of a fusion. There's it's a fusion between prose and film. You have the visuals, but you also can get into people's heads in a way you can't. And yeah, it's I think all of them, prose, film, horror, it all has they all have their pros and cons. But yeah, it's that budget. You're right, the budget. Now, as I'm saying this, I have a couple of collaborators who I know, they're watching this right now and they're saying, how dare you? How dare you? Because the budget is my time.
Oh. Well, I have to ask you, because you have a fiction novel coming out. What was it like moving from comics to that first novel? Because that's the one that's like hiccuping me, because I've been working in this visual space for so long where if somebody looks at their watch, I just show the damn watch. But having them look at the watch and think about it, that's a whole nother level.
It's tough. I just went through my first rounds of like real edits on the novel. And my notes and what I was doing to the novel were much more invasive than what the editor was asking for, because I was seeing things like, oh no, I have to really dig in now, because look, comics are collaborative. I screw something up in the script, I'm waiting for the artist to save the day and make it awesome.
They're going to catch all your inaccuracies. And I love that.
And there are times where I've written something and I'm just like, oh, I'm not sure. Thinking back, I'm not sure that works. And then I get the art and I'm like, oh, it completely works. It's amazing. But in a novel, it's all me. So I found that sometimes I was like glossing over things. I was moving past things that I shouldn't be moving past. And I really needed to dig into those. So it was, it was a big learning curve for me. It was tough. And I think but like I said, I think there's a learning curve between film and comics is a curve, but not as much as between comics and a prose. That was I over the couple of decades I've been doing comics, I've learned to rely heavily on my collaborators.
No doubt.
So that took a little bit of getting used to.
Yeah.
So I want us to one of the things I do is I want us to recommend some horror comics. And I have a list, and I know you have some. Let's just start recommending some horror comics that people should check out.
Okay, so my first one, Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees.
Of course.
This has been one of my absolute faves over the last couple of years. I guess it's been about 2 years, probably 2024 that it came out first. So it's already in like the trade paperback edition, and they've started on the second one. But it feels like this is such like an 80s kid thing. If you remember like Richard Scarry's Little Town, where it's like all the animals and like the worm driving the apple around, and like it's an entire cute little town populated by animals. It's that, but we're following a bear who happens to be a serial killer. And it feels compelled to kill people. And she chooses not to kill people in her town. She usually kind of branches out and goes elsewhere. But then she realizes that somebody else is killing people in her town, and it's like attracting attention back to her. But you're looking at these cute, cuddly animals, and it is brutal, like full eviscerated, like, what the killers are doing. It's brutal. And it's a weird thing because it's very Dexter-esque, where you are following your protagonist and antagonist are a serial killer who you are following around, watching doing these horrible, horrible things. But at the same time, you're like, God, I hope she takes down the other serial killer. It's wild. It's absolutely wild.
Yeah, it's cute
Mhm.
and it's kind of sweet and it's vicious.
Yep.
It's so good. Yeah. So it's not on my list, so I'm glad you mentioned it. So that's because it is definitely worth checking out.
Yeah.
So my first is a little. All right, look, it's a little pat. I think I picked some things that people won't think about, but I do think if you haven't checked them out, I think readers should really look at those
Mhm.
those original EC comics runs. Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear. Those stories, they were some of the best writers of that era, and some of the best art you will ever imagine. I mean, I've got them. I remember when I was in college in West Plains, Missouri, I was walking around the town square one day between classes, and I looked through this window, and there were all these giant EC books, EC hardcover.
They did the Vault of Horrors and everything. They're beautiful.
And there was a guy named Russ Cochran who used to print these gigantic black and white editions of the EC books, and that was his office. I didn't realize it at the time. I just thought, wow, this is a cool, look at all those EC books.
Oh, wow.
And then I've read them and since then, and they're just so good.
Mhm.
And when I was making my list, I was like, do I remember any of these stories? So like if I'm going to say they're great, can I just from the top, off the top of my head, do I remember these EC stories? I was like, of course I do, because there's one where there's like a sideshow, and there's like a two-headed man who's in like a jar of formaldehyde, and he falls in love with a mummy who's also in the sideshow that he sees every night, looks across, and it gets exceptionally grotesque. You have to fill in the blanks with some of it, but it's super horrifying when you really think about it. But yeah, those EC books, if people only know them from Tales from the Crypt, the TV show, which I loved, you should check them out. And I know, Oni Press is doing new EC titles, but those original ones were so great, and you can still get like reprint editions.
I always remember the arts. Like there was one of the covers are what stand out to me. I remember one where it's like a girl toasting, and you look through the glass and you see a guy on the other side, but whatever is viewed inside that glass is like a skeleton.
Yeah.
There were so many of those covers that I was just like, oh my God, this is like next level.
They learned long ago that if you put a skull or a skeleton on the cover of your comic, it's going to sell a little better.
Oh yeah. My next rec, this is a little bit more of a deep cut, and I'm shocked I haven't seen more people talking about this, but this is one of my favorite comics from or I'll call it a graphic novel from the last couple of years. The Crossroads at Midnight by Abby. Okay, see, you haven't, this is why I am preaching this thing like crazy.
I'm not familiar.
The Crossroads at Midnight from 2021 from Iron Circus Comics by Abby Howard. And this one, it's a collection of maybe 4 or 5 stories in it. The art is absolutely astounding. It's like cross-hatching I'll call it cross-hatch art. Like you see in like My Favorite Thing is Monsters. It's that same level of like lines. It's just real intricate. But what makes this so amazing, I'm going to call it Midwestern Junji Ito.
Okay.
Everything is super intense, body horror, really visceral, really kind of gets under your skin and like seeds there, like really figures out like how to like make you uncomfortable. But the majority of it is set in like Indiana. Like it is just this Midwestern wildness. And so I'm a huge Junji Ito fan. This was literally like, a lot of Junji Ito is very much rooted in Japanese culture, and it still translates, but it's still very much rooted in that culture. This is rooted in farming culture. and growing up in a small town. And there was just something so fantastic about it. Crossroads at Midnight.
All right, I will check it out immediately because I'm not familiar. I should be. Because everything you just said sounds like it's right up my alley.
This is one that I have been so shocked. Like we just had WonderCon in here in LA like last month, and I was on a horror comics panel there, and this was like my final recommendation, and nobody in the audience had heard about it. And I was like, y'all go find this on the floor right now. It is so worth it.
No, yeah, I'll check it out immediately. I did not, by the way, put any Junji Ito on my list.
I didn't either.
Because I feel like, look, everyone knows I love Junji Ito. So the next one on my list, I'm going to try to stump you with some that you haven't heard of, but you probably heard of all of these. So I'm going back to horror anthologies one more time. I'm going back to that well. There was a book in the late 90s called Flinch.
Nope, I haven't heard of it.
So Flinch was put out by Vertigo. It ran 16 issues, I think. And it was a horror anthology, horror and crime. But they really got the best writers in crime and horror at that era and amazing artists to do a horror anthology that was completely different, that would take people by surprise, that ran kind of stretch the boundaries of what horror could be. And it has some of the darkest stories you could imagine.
Oh, I'm in. And that's a great damn title. Wow.
The book was like from like issue 1. I'm pretty sure like issue 1 said we're probably going to get canceled immediately, like in the letters pages or what. And throughout the series, they kept saying we're going to get canceled. We're going to get canceled. But every story is just unexpected. It's not a typical horror anthology. It's something. Every story gives you something you may not love, or it's just going to blow you away. But it always is different than what you think. And even if you only read one story from it, Joe Lansdale and Bruce Timm did a story called Red Romance about these two sort of brutal killers who fall in love.
Ooh.
It is so dark and vicious. But yeah, definitely check out Flinch if you haven't. I'm sure you can get them in like I don't think quarter boxes exist anymore. I'm sure you can get them at dollar boxes all over the place. But and I think they've been collected, although they might be out of print. But Flinch is awesome.
Okay, I'm gonna have to hunt it down. Okay, next up, since you mentioned about how so intense some of those are, I am going to pitch or recommend the only comic that I've read in the last couple of years that I literally had to like put down, take a breath, and then come back to. And I saw it just won some massive award in the graphic novel space yesterday. This is Tender by Beth Hetland.
I have not read it. I'm familiar, but I have not read it.
Oh boy. So I had Fantagraphic Books had sent me like an ARC copy of this, like the year, like right before it came out. And it sat on my shelf because the picture on the front cover is just like a dollhouse with a little bit of blood on the floor. And it didn't do much for me. And I was like, I'll get there. And finally, like 2 months ago, I read it and it is so intense, but intense in the smallest way possible, like nail cuticle intense. Like pulling a nail cuticle until it bleeds, that level of like squirmy intensity. I'm not talking like, Ed Pisker's like Red Room has like a completely different effect on me where I'm like, okay, cool. We've eviscerated everybody. This got under my skin. And not like I couldn't keep reading it, but I had to put it down, take a breath because it was giving me like that level of anxiety and then go back to it. This one is about it's just basically a woman who's obsessed with having the perfect life. It begins with her right before she's getting married, her life with her husband, and then trying to get pregnant, which makes it sound so not horror, but this was one of the scariest, most fucked up things I'd read this year. So Tender by Beth Hetland.
All right, awesome. And I will, by the way, I'm going to put links to all these in the comments and everything so people will know where to get these or find them at least or find out more.
Excellent.
So my next one, it's a broad. I'm going broad with this one. Have you seen these Crypt comics?
I don't think so.
There is a line of comics called Crypt.
I have seen these. I've seen them. I haven't read it.
They adapt old movies, like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu and Carnival of Souls. And they're almost, it's obvious when you look at it that they're taking stills from the film and putting them into comic form. And then they brush over them a little bit with art to kind of smooth it out. it's almost like the old photo comics or fumetti comics, from when I was a kid. But there's something so charming and fun about them, and seeing these comics that, with Nosferatu, obviously they're able to add all this dialogue into it and tell the story. But it looks like you're it's watching the movie on the page. I was not familiar with them until this year, and I won some in a raffle, and now I'm like really obsessed with them. They do Kickstarters all the time for their books. And I think they even are doing a few new original things that they're still using that same technique for. But they're really cool to just to look at. And they've kind of got all of them have a nice uniform vibe that you can put on a shelf, and they look nice together. But yeah, these Crypt books that's my next recommendation, because it's a little different than the stuff you'll see in comics right now.
Oh, wow. And I just noticed that they have a Cthulhu one, so I'm in.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to another deep cut one, because this was another one of my pleasant discoveries from a couple of years ago. I think this actually may have been a Kickstarter, but I didn't find this until I was at a comic convention last year and found it at a table. And this is Teether from Antarctic Press. I think this one was actually released as issues, but the one that I found was like the hardback bound edition. Dave Hutchinson is the writer and the artist, and it is just absolutely brutal art and gorgeous, about a kid who doesn't really have any friends, but then one day this girl transfers into his classroom. I think they're supposed to be in middle school. And this is all kind of in the backdrop of this like local kid who went missing, and they're finding his grisly remains. And then as he's becoming really good friends with this new girl, he begins to think that she may have had something to do with the boy who died in the woods at the start of the comic. And so it's just kind of this really cool middle grade suspicion tale with a really brutal monsters in it.
I've not read it, so you're
just Google it and look at the cover. It's
it.
like some next level beautiful monster art going on.
I like that we are hitting things that we're not super familiar with. I dig it. So my next one is, look, we all know in zombie apocalypse comics, there's one overarching title, right? Like this is the zombie apocalypse comic.
Mm-hmm.
And there's others. There's, so there's Walking Dead, and then there's plenty. But I'm going to recommend a zombie comic that is not Walking Dead. And that is I Am a Hero by, and I'm going to get the name wrong. It's Kinjo Hanazawa, probably. That sounds right. But I Am a Hero. It's a Japanese book. It's the story of this guy. He's an artist who is kind of down on his luck and struggling and not getting where he wants to be in life. And then this disease runs rampant worldwide and turns people into flesh-hungry mutant zombies. And he decides that this is his moment to become a hero in the world, because for whatever reason, he actually has like a sporting shotgun. And he's like, that's not common in Japan. So he's like, I got a shotgun. I'm going to go out and I'm going to be a hero. But this book is, first of all, beautiful. Second of all, really weird. The longer it goes, the weirder it gets. But also, the thing I love about zombie stories, like if I'm watching a zombie movie or any kind of outbreak movie, I like the moment before the zombies show up. I like the stuff building up to it. And like all these great Japanese comics, it takes its time. It doesn't just throw you into it. Really, it eases you in the most grueling possible way into this zombie apocalypse. And it was a 22 volume manga, and Dark Horse has released it all in 11 big thick editions. Super good, super weird. It's got that Junji Ito body horror element to it at moments, and it's just and it's beautifully rendered. It's amazing.
Wow. Okay, I just wrote this one down as well. Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to take us to, this is a more recent one, but this one I just fell in love with. This is The Me You Love in the Dark. This is Scotty Young. Artist is George Corona. And this is from Image in 2022. And it is about just a rather despondent artist who can't find her place in the world, who decides to get out of the city and move into the outskirts of this city into an old Victorian house. And what she finds there is some type of otherworldly being who lives in the house, who first kind of exhibits itself as like a ghost, think like Amityville, but quickly falls in love with her and she falls in love with it, and it becomes this very codependent relationship, both kind of mentally and sexually. And but as the more that she gets into it, she realizes that it's also kind of draining her, that it's taking something from her, and that it's no longer letting her leave, and that she's kind of ceasing to exist and she's just kind of seceding into this being. And it's real heady and otherworldly and feels like an allegory for depression, but it's such a beautiful love story at the same time. This one just kind of took me in and swept me.
Yeah, and also, look, I don't want to I'm not giving Scotty Young any credits or anything, but that's a joke. It's a joke. It's got a great title.
Oh my God, yeah.
Such a beautiful title. It's evocative, and it's one of those titles that pays off in the comic itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get what you think you're going to get, and it's awesome.
Yeah, no, this was really good. And I mean, and coming from like, I'd read I Hate Fairyland, so that's what I was bringing to the table, and then seeing this side, it's a much different vibe.
For sure. So my last one is one I recommend almost anytime people say, what do you like for, what's a good horror comic? Especially if they ask me around Halloween, because this is what I think is one of the perfect Halloween comics. And it kind of has a Bradbury vibe to it. It's got a great setup, but it's called The Upturned Stone by Scott Hampton.
I've never heard of this one either. You're hitting some good ones here.
So this book, it came out in the early 90s, 92 or 93. It's all painted. It's only like 45 or 50 pages. It's very short, very, you get in and out. But it's gorgeous. But the setup alone is these kids go out on Halloween. They go out into a cemetery where pumpkins are growing. There's a pumpkin patch in the middle of a cemetery, and they pick the biggest pumpkin they can find, and they bring it home, and their mom turns it into a pumpkin pie, which they all eat. And as soon as that happens, ghosts start to manifest around them, and they start encountering ghosts. And from there, it turns into this sort of revenge story, and these kids going on this, guided by ghosts, go on this revenge story. And it's super creepy. It's super pretty. And it is a perfect comic for Halloween. I'm not sure if it was ever published in any other form. It came out in a nice oversized hardcover from Heavy Metal.
Oh wow!
I don't know if it came out in any other form, but it's well worth tracking down and checking out. But just, if nothing else, it's just gorgeous.
Wow. Okay. That has been added to my list along with Flinch, I Am Hero, and the Crypt comics. So I just got a beautiful list.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about what have you got coming in terms of comics, because I've read Barstow, and in your podcast you use the term bonkers a little bit.
We do. That's kind of our fave word.
And I remember reading Barstow and thinking, oh, well, this is a bonkers comic. There's a moment in Barstow that it's a great story leading up to it. And then there's a moment. It's like, nope, there's no going back. This is it. It's now elevating into something much more terrifying and awful. And that was my bonkers moment in that book. So what are you working on right now in terms of horror comics?
So yeah, we finished up our first four of Barstow, and so it's going to go into the trade paperback, which comes out in July, and I'm hoping to God we get another 4, because it's as you can tell from the first 4, it's a giant story. Like, we had originally conceived it as a TV series. And that's what we worked with Tyler on, was like creating the whole town. We wanted every single person in it to have a character. Like, he kept saying, I've drawn so many characters. And I was like, and I made a new one in the next issue. And so yeah, just making it feel huge. And so we have a lot more story to tell with that. We're already in talks with Dark Horse about another one. But what this did, what being able to make Barstow did was really kind of open our eyes to how much we enjoy graphic novels, and that it gives us kind of this other space to be a storyteller. And whereas I am beating my head against a wall most days to get shit made here in Hollywood, that, a graphic novel is something that I have a little bit more control over, and that I can somewhat, write it on my own and then send it to people. And then they might say, yeah, it seems a little like I can get the ideas out there, and the budget is not as much a hurdle. So with that, we have 2 books of Pretty Evil with our art by Tim Seeley coming from Simon & Schuster, McElderry Press. And then from Penguin Random House, Penguin Readers, I have a middle grade horror graphic novel series coming called 1313 Shadowbrook Road, which is basically like X-Files for a 10-year-old girl in a New York City brownstone. And it's something that we had also, my husband and I had written it while we were living in New York City, like when I was first starting to work for Fangoria, and we had based it off of the brownstone that we were living in at the time, because kids ran the building. Like there was this pack of kids that ran the entire building, and all the neighbors knew them and they knew everything. And if you ever needed to know where a package was, those kids knew exactly everything that was going on in the building. And we thought it was such a cool vibe to kind of that they were the ears and eyes of the building. And so we wanted to kind of take that and turn it supernatural. So Penguin Random House picked up 2 books of that. And then we have another one coming from Simon & Schuster that hasn't been announced yet. So that has, and then we're working with another comic company that I can't announce yet either, but it's just kind of been this amazing world. And I still have films in the works, but those take a lot longer and require a lot more tears than I have encountered. And I'm sure there will be tears in comics, but it has not been quite as, prolific and headbanging as I find in the film industry.
Well, I'm excited for all of that stuff, and I really appreciate you joining me today and talking about some horror comics.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There's going to come a moment where I want to talk about aquatic horror, and I don't know anyone anyone else I would want to talk about that with.
I almost made my entire recommendation list that, because I was like, I'm going to do the Wake, I'm going to do Depth H, I'm just going to do aquatic horror, I'm going to do Everything is Teeth, it's going to be awesome. And then I was like, no, I'll diversify a bit.
Keep that in your back pocket, and we'll do that.
I will.
I'm into it.
You mentioned fishing in the creek. That was my childhood. That's like where because I grew up on the Shenandoah River. Like my parents' house is on the Shenandoah River. And so the shit my dad pulled up out of that river is every nightmare I had as a kid.
For sure. Absolutely.
So yes, I'm back for aquatic horror. Only if you come back for the new book, we expect to see you back on Colors of the Dark for the new book.
For sure. Until you read it and you're like, oh no, Cullen.
I bet it's going to be awesome. And I got to tell you, my daughter still absolutely loves your Ghoul Next Door books. So both of those she just adored.
Thanks to her. That's because we love them. Kat and I would really love to do more of that, more in that world. So, I never say never. I've got my fingers crossed.
It's such a rich world, such good world building. So well done. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I said, I'm gonna put links to all your recommendations in the comments below so that everyone can see it. But thank you. I appreciate you joining me for this. So I take some questions from some of our viewers every episode, and you can leave these questions, by the way, if you follow me on my Discord channel or my Patreon. You can shoot me questions and I'll try to address them. The question today was, when did comics make the jump into horror? Did they move from crime books into horror? What is the reason that EC did it best? And you'll hear me talk about EC comics a lot. I feel like horror comics have always been a thing, though. Horror comics were a thing before superhero comics ever caught on. So I don't think they ever made the jump. They've always been there. The last decade or so, there have been more and more horror comics, more books that are designed to scare the hell out of you. EC did it best because they really gave a damn. They made a conscious effort to hire the very best writers and the very best artists to tell these stories, and they were no-hold-barred tales of terror. And I think that's all you really need. The commitment, the interest in doing it, the love of the game, and the desire to make the best story. And they got creators who were invested in those stories. And you'll always hear me say that when when all the creative team is invested in telling the story the best way, you're going to get the best comics. And that's what EC did from the beginning. So that was our episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please subscribe, hit the like button, check me out at cullenbunn.com, and I can't wait to do this again.